I think probably the hardest part as a parent for us, when it comes to them having a relationship with God, we have to partner with God because He knows them better than we do. I think sometimes we think, well, we're the parent and we're responsible, but God knows them better. There is a level of decision making that our kids will own. And as a parent, our job is just to cultivate the best soil in their heart for them to make the best choices. But at the end of the day, they will make their choices.
So what does the Bible say? Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast session. We're excited that you're here. I'm here with some friends, as usual. We've got Pastor Robert and Natalie Favela here with us, which is awesome. And Tracia is back on the pod, which is
what you call it?
Yeah, sure. Wow. Yeah, and we're excited. Listen, if you were able to come out to our parenting workshop, we were so glad you were able to be there. We hope you got a lot out of that. FYI, we will be posting soon the audio so that those that missed it will be able to listen, maybe even watch. I think at least the audio will be posted, so we're excited about that. But in this whole process this year with Grow and the discipleship area of the church, we're trying to produce more and more resources, as I've said over and over again. And one of the things we want to continue to do is have this back and forth with you guys in the church about different topics. And so at the parenting workshop, we asked you to send in your questions. And guys, we got some questions to no surprise. And we're grateful for all of those questions that came in. And what we're going to do today is, unfortunately, what we can't do is line by line, question by question, go through every single question that came in. But what we're going to try to do is break off into chunks, questions that relate to a certain topic, and we're going to just talk about that topic together. Really quick, I think most people listening would know generally who we all are, but why don't we at least do this? And each of us can say the ages of our kids so that everybody knows kind of what season of parenting we're in. I would be the least experienced parent here. My kids are 7, 5, and 3. And so I'm still in that young little stage. And Tracy, how old are your kids?
I feel like I'm still in the least experienced stage too. My oldest son is 20. I have another son who's 16, and my daughter will be 12 in just a few weeks.
Okay. That's much more experience than me. So, what about the Favelas?
Yeah, our kids, my son Jude is 10, and our daughter Numi is 8.
Okay. So we've got ages 3 to 20 represented here on the parenting spectrum. And so what we're going to do is dive right into it. And the first subject that I just want to bring up has to do with, we got lots of questions having to do with how do we as parents help our kids grow spiritually? Or what does discipleship look like in the home? How do I encourage a spiritual hunger? I'll just read a couple of the things. How do you instill God into their lives? What do you do if there's a parent in the home that's not a believer? How do you get your kids interested in reading, studying the Bible? And we don't have to address all of these at once, but we could start wherever. Well, why don't we pause before I read 10 more questions and just open the subject of what does it look like to help our kids grow spiritually? Because that's it feels to me as a parent like a monumental task. And I think being a younger parent, I've had, prior to having kids, or maybe when I first had my first kid, I had like this idealized vision in my head of how I was going to lead my home spiritually. And, we were going to do in-depth Bible studies every night, and we were going to worship and usher in the presence of God. Absolutely. Visions of angels, all kinds of stuff. And, that's been reduced down to, at bedtime, I sing a worship song and I do sing.
Oh, Lord.
I didn't say well, but I do sing. The kids, though, are ignoring me half the time. I'm reading a Bible verse and they're goofing around, not listening. And so we could have a vision of what we think it looks like on paper to cultivate spirituality in our home or disciple our kids or help our kids grow spiritually. And then you have reality, which quickly sets in as you begin to try to implement certain things. But I'm guessing that's not to say that this is impossible, and we all feel the weight and the responsibility to do this. But let me pause there. That's my little introduction to the subject. We could start anywhere on this. Any thoughts? Any ways that you guys are approaching this endeavor to help your kids grow spiritually?
Yeah, I think I'll just start off. This for me before, jumping into any like practice or tactic, if you will. The part that helps me out the most is having the right mindset. Some people might call it theology, but what is your thinking around your role for helping your children be shaped by God? Natalie and even my friends know I love to garden. I'm not the best gardener, but I love it. It's cathartic. I love being out in the yard. But what kind of flawed mindset would I have if I believed I was the one who made my plants grow? Right. It just, I know that I am not the one who puts the design and the power into my shrubs growing or small plants being cultivated. However, I am the one who gets to cultivate the garden, who gets to work with what I understand happens naturally with things. I understand naturally that you cannot let weeds fester. That would be an example. So I have to do things there. I would know that they have to get their proper nutrients. I know that they have to get watered. So I'm using that all as a working illustration because I've been in seasons where I've taken way too much of the burden on of I am responsible for making my kids spiritually grow. And that's just not true. I have a role to play, but what am I doing to be able to prepare the lane, if you will, to manage to or cultivate what God has already put in them, what he's put in the community around us, so that it can promote growth. And so that's just kind of probably where I would start before I even jump into any practice.
Yeah, I think when I think of the topic of like spirituality and children, I think a lot of the times we can abdicate a little bit. If you go to a good church, like our kids love coming to church, you can be like, well, they'll take care of it on Sunday, and then I'll kind of fill in the blanks. They go to a Christian school, right? So I think sometimes we can do a little bit of that. But really zooming out, I would say when it comes to any kind of relationship with God, part of it is seasonal. Like, so if we're talking about, your kids, Garrett, like when Jude and Numi were that age, we got little tiny spurts of, hey, we'd go out, out to the park with the kids, right? And you're like, look at all the different colors of flowers. Like God made so many different, like, it's really just when kids are little, there's a lot of like awe. There's a lot of just pointing out where God already is in the everyday life. You're not giving them, even memorizing Bible verses, like that's great. But we've experienced with a 10-year-old, he can tell you all the Beatitudes. He can tell you now whether or not that translates to home life with his sister. That's a different
the
story.
Beatitudes, but his attitude would be wrong. Like, yeah.
So for us, we've just realized we've had to take it seasonally, and even in the season that we're in. So there's seasons where our kids are a certain age, but our life is really full. So we have to be realistic. Like we're not going to have communion every Sunday night. We're not going to light candles at Sabbath. And that's okay. But I think sometimes parents will ask, well, how do I get involved in my kids' discipleship? And I say, no, you're leading their discipleship. So to what Robert said, there are a lot of things oftentimes or people that can help cultivate growth, help cultivate the growth in the kids. But as a parent, like it does matter that we lead and that we're intentional in the small ways that we can be to just know like what version of God are they getting, right? Because there's a version, you'll get a version from God from even people who say they don't believe in God. Even that's a version, right? So for us, it's, we use the analogy of the sponge all the time. Like just think about your kids at the youngest age, they're a sponge and they're going to have a thought and a theology and a practice with God. And our job is just every day, how can we soak their little sponge more and more so that when it gets wrung out, they know God and they may not be able to quote a Bible verse, but they know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I although I was lamenting the reality of, the breakdown of the idealized vision that I had. I'm not giving up on that. And actually something really cool happened recently where my wife was going through some things in our girls' room, and she found like a little card. And it's so precious that I'm not going to say publicly what was written on the card, but it was one of my kids expressing some thoughts to God, almost like a little journal in like 2 sentences, but it was so articulate and it was so sincere. And my wife was kind of teared up about it. And I was reminded like, hey, keep singing the songs, keep reading the Bible verses, keep having the conversations, because it may seem like they are not taking any of it in, but something's getting in there and we're doing something right, even if it feels like chaos. And even if it's not, me teaching a Bible class to my 3 kids while they sit there and soak it up, that's not how it's going to look. And at the end of the day, I agree with what you said at the beginning, Robert. There's a lot of truth there where there's a weightiness to the responsibility we feel, but then at the end of the day, our kids, they're God's. And it's sort of like walking that fine line between, as you said, what is the role that I have to play? And then when am I taking on the full responsibility of this? And then at every turn, I feel like a failure. Because there's a lot of that goes on. And I don't know if you guys want to speak to that, actually. I think when we're trying to put forth effort as a parent and try to build a Christ-like family and home, we could be our biggest critic. And you could begin to look at your 8-year-old and feel disappointed, not just in them, but in yourself, thinking, oh, I've failed them because they're not acting like they're 18 and I'm a totally mature Christ follower, which is ridiculous. They're an 8-year-old. Like, what were we doing when we were 8 years old? I was not reading my Bible. I could tell you that. And so I think I like this approach maybe in this conversation is, can we take a step back and talk about what goes on in us internally as parents, in our souls when we're approaching this? Because the guilt and the shame and the constant feeling guilty about things is not helpful. That's never a good motivator for me to get whatever job done that needs to get done. So I wonder if we can explore that a little bit. What do we need to do within ourselves before God as we're approaching this thing with our kids? Any thoughts on that? Or any thoughts about any of it?
Yeah, I think when you were talking, I kind of felt the weight of what you were talking about, like the tension, if you will. And this phrase kind of popped up in my heart, and the phrase was final verdict. That when I experience sometimes like a bad behavior from Jude or inexpressiveness from my daughter, kind of locking me out because she doesn't know how to express herself, in my body, I somehow feel like that's the final verdict. Like, this is the final trajectory. It's going to head this way. They're going to turn out bad. Very simplistic language, but I'm trying to characterize the fear that's inside me. And that's really what it is. It's fear. Fear speaking that what you're experiencing now, just project that 12, 20 years from now, and that's what you get. And that's absolutely false. So if you're able to even reframe the experience in terms of, I just experienced an unwanted behavior, and being able to engage with that, both with God. Sometimes it's even, we've talked about unwanted behavior with our kids. Not only, most of the time we're comfortable with telling our kids, hey, that was wrong. Very rarely are we comfortable going to them saying, here's how that made me feel. Like, and that's new for me, to even go to Jude and let him know, like, hey, I want to let you know that the reason why I reacted the way I did is because Dad was scared. I was actually just scared that this is how you're always going to act, and that's just not true. Like, God has grace on your life. He has grace on mine. He's helping us, and I need to ask for your forgiveness. So I'm sorry for acting that way, but Dad was just afraid.
That actually, to me, that's powerful. I think maybe a part of this process of, okay, how do I do this thing? How do I build spiritual growth in my home? Is that we invite our kids on our journey our spiritual growth, which is like counterintuitive. Like, no, I just need, because I could feel like I just need to instruct them and they just need to do what I say because I know what is best. But what I heard there was, no, part of it could be just vulnerability with your own kids. Like, hey, here's what I'm going through when we have this conflict, or we're dealing with this problem, or we're having this conversation, which I think is, if we're going to talk about like high levels of spiritual and emotional health, that's a really cool thing, I think, to cultivate with our kids.
Even the vulnerability of saying, I don't know. Like, there's times where the kids will ask me questions about the Bible, and I'm like, that's a really good question. I don't know right now. But I'll come back. I'll try and find out, but I don't know. Because I think sometimes we can feel like we have to know everything. And if not, then our kid's not going to know what they need to know. And it's like sometimes we just say, hey, can we take a pause and we'll come back to it. So I think that's one thing that we've tried to, as much with our kids as we can, is just let them know it's a journey, but we don't have all the answers, because there's things about God we're still discovering. There's still things about God that, we're learning. And so that's something that is hard, because as a parent, you feel like you need to have all the answers when they ask the questions. But I think allowing the grace to recognize, like, this is a partnership with God. And so I think probably the hardest part as a parent for us is keeping that at the forefront, is that when it comes to them having a relationship with God, we have to partner with God because he knows them better than we do. I think sometimes we think, well, we're the parent and we're responsible, but God knows them better. And I still remember when I first met Robert's family, Robert was wandering the desert at the time, and and his mom,
the manna.
Yeah, well, no,
The manna of the world.
it was more like the prodigal in the pigsty, but it's fine.
True. Eating the peas in the mud.
Yeah.
Dang, calling me out on the parenting podcast.
You tried to whitewash it. We can't have it.
I know.
I'm
I
here. But I remember, like, he, meeting his parents, praying for this prodigal son that was away. And I thought, man, this family who, like, they've been married, they did all the right things. They served in church, they tithe, everything. And they have 2 kids. And the 2 kids who grew up in the same house with the same parents went 2 different directions. And it's weird because in some way it was comforting that there is a level of decision-making that our kids will own. And as a parent, our job is just to cultivate the best soil in their heart for them to make the best choices. But at the end of the day, they will make their choices. And we can't, like, there's probably parents listening who can think of their own kids. And they're like, man, one kid like loves God and has a relationship and the other one doesn't. And the propensity, because the enemy works that way, is to blame yourself for everything. And that doesn't mean there isn't something we missed. However, kids will inevitably have to take responsibilities for their relationship. And as a parent, it's okay that we can't protect them from making bad choices. We can't disciple them out of every bad choice. But it has to be a partnership with God, because the grace will come from that relationship for when our kids do take on their own relationship with God and it doesn't quite look the way we expected.
Yeah. Now that's really good. What you made me think of was, it can be, I think, as a parent, we obviously have a different purview on life in general and on our journey and walk with Christ. And it's easy to look at our kids and go, I'm going to show you all the hoops. I'm going to show you all the turns you need to make. And if you follow these instructions, then you'll come out the other side pristine. Yeah. And I think the reality is we have to view our relationship with our kids and their relationship with God when it comes to the spiritual growth thing as a journey. And when you have multiple kids, that journey is going to look different for each child. And we have to probably loosen our grip and we're in it for the long haul, right? This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And probably what becomes most important in certain instances, and I may be getting ahead of ourselves in the conversation here, is if our kids start to take wrong turns, what's more important, correcting the turn or keeping our relationship with them and our intimacy with them intact? Because the worst thing that we want is, oh, my kid's taking wrong turns, and by the way, they won't even talk to me, and we have no relationship. And so that's an interesting little rabbit trail that we can go down, because we're all also coming into this with all of our own baggage from our own upbringing, all of our own baggage from our own spiritual growth. How did it go for me? What didn't work for me? And whether we like it or not, probably to varying degrees, we project some of that stuff onto our kids. Like, this is how it's going to go for you, because I'm not going to let this happen to you because it happened to me. And it's like, if they're ultimately in God's hands, that's outside of your control anyway. Right. And so there's some things you're just not going to be able to prevent. And it's easy to go into panic mode. Like you said, a moment becomes defining. It's like our enemy too takes a snapshot of that, puts it in front of our faces and said, that's it. They're done. Your kid is toast. It's like, no, he had a bad moment. She had a bad moment. It's calm down. Like, everything's going to be okay.
And when we try to course correct for our kids, it handicaps them, especially the older they get. And you have to learn. It's one of the hardest things I have found is letting go. And as they get older, you realize I cannot drive this car for them. I have to let them be able to make decisions and fall and grow some discernment. And sometimes you want to be the discernment for them, but you have to realize I'm not going to be there for them all the time. And so they have to learn that muscle. They have to develop that muscle. And so that's I'm finding it's one of the hardest parts of parenting is to say, okay, God, I trust you with my children. I've put everything that I know to put into them, and now they have to learn to fly. Wow. And it happens in stages. Once they get to middle school, there's a level of independence. Once they get to high school and college, and you just have to say, okay, I'm not going to be you can't be the helicopter parent. Like, once they get to a certain age, you will burn yourself out trying to be a helicopter parent. But you have to trust that God knows what's best, and he wants what's best for your child as well.
What ages are your kids again, one more time?
20, 16, almost 12.
Wow, that's fascinating. You have an adult child.
I do. Yes.
That's wild. So is there...
I would say I'm an adult child too.
Exactly. Yes.
Julie's not here to talk, so we'll never know what she would say. She might agree with that about me, but do you have, what's it like to have a 20-year-old and then to have your youngest, who's still very much a kid?
Well, the youngest acts like an adult, so it's like I'm raising
that's true.
3 adults.
I know your youngest a little bit, and that's
yes,
true.
She's very mature.
She's very mature, but do you have an advantage when you have the span of ages to modify your parenting for the younger one based on what you went through with the older one, or is that not really a thing?
No, it's some things are the same, but each child is different.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
and so I have an easy first child, and the last one is a doozy. So you can't really apply, the same filters to each child. And so you have to adjust accordingly. So
it doesn't get easier.
It does not get easier.
You would probably agree that the values of your home don't change.
The values don't change. Right. Right. Yeah.
The approach changes.
Right. The approach changes with each child. And sometimes my oldest will give me advice on how to deal with the youngest one.
And is it good advice?
It's good advice because he was like, when I was this age, don't you remember you did this with me? And I'm like, nope, forgot, but thank you for that. Yeah. So I'll take like some discipline that I forgot that I did with him and like, oh, let me pull that out of the arsenal. I totally forgot about that.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
So you talked, I want to just pause for a moment and camp out just to pick your brain a little bit more on the idea of letting go. Because I know that obviously as a teenagers moving into adulthood, I imagine there's a lot of that going on. But I also imagine that throughout the span of the lives of our kids, there's always a letting go. So is there anything more you could say about that? How do you do that, Antracia? How do you let go?
it starts early. I remember when the last kid was not sitting on my lap anymore. Like, I grieved that. It was like, oh my gosh, she's not sitting on my lap anymore. She's not holding my hand anymore. And so you have to grieve that and say, okay, we're in a new stage now. And so each stage for me, has been a little bit of grieving and then realizing, okay, we're moving on to the next stage. And I have to let go because they don't care. They're ready to move on. So it's a lot of letting goes over and over again. And so even by the time I've gotten to the third kid, it's still hard, but you realize if I don't, like I said earlier, you're going to handicap them. And so you have to just like toughen up. And I think it's different for moms than dads. I think moms may have a harder time letting go. Maybe it depends on the
Yeah, we definitely got role reversal over here.
Oh, yeah. I was like, maybe it depends on the person.
Because Natalie's always said we're not raising kids, we're raising adults. So she's like, no, you gonna go. And I'm over here like, no.
Yeah. So it's probably the personality, yeah. But it's sometimes I feel like it's like the first time that my oldest son's freshman year of college, I was not well. Like, it was very hard for me. And he's local. Like, he didn't go anywhere. But just knowing that, the rhythm of our house changed. We're a homeschooling family. He wasn't going to be there anymore. He's out in the world, and I have to trust that he can protect himself. He can make smart choices. He won't get beat up. Not that I'm saying he's a wimp, but you worry about these things. Is he going to be okay in the world? Does he have street smarts? Because I grew up in a generation where we had street smarts. Yeah. Like, did I raise him to have enough street smarts in the world? Just all these little things. Will he make sure his wallet is okay? It's just all these little things that you worry about when they're not little. Yeah. And you just have to trust. I did a good enough job.
And in every season, like, we don't have teenagers, obviously, but like, I'll give you an example with Jude. We've tried to find ways where we empower him to like discern for himself. You mentioned that earlier. So one of the things we did last year is he wanted to learn to play the drums, but he's been playing flag football for a few years now. And we said, well, here's like kind of the parameters for our home. We can only let you do one activity. And so we sent him off and said, what do you think you should do? Should you learn drums and commit to band, or should you play flag football? Because we can't do both. And he's like, well, I don't know. And so Robert said, why don't you go pray? And we gave him a few days, and we didn't prompt him again. And he came and said, Dad, I think I'm going to learn to play the drums. I think God's telling me to not play football this year. And for us, like, we liked going to his football games, but we realized we have to get him into a pattern and a rhythm of going to God with decision making about small things, because we could have decided for him, this is free, this is more expensive, you're going to do that. This takes more time, this takes more effort, you're going to do that. But we said, if it's something for him, and he would have been fine. Honestly, if we would have given him a logical reason for why we made the decision, he would have been fine with it. But we realized it would have taken the opportunity away from him to be able to discern in that moment, God, what should I do? And I really feel it was one of those go right or go left things, right? But at the end of the day, he needed to make that call, and then he could own it. So throughout the year, when he didn't want to get ready for band, or when he wanted to complain about not playing football, we said, well, did you pray? And did God answer? And then he could go back to that and not rely on us to just make all the decisions. Because really we can for a long time until we can't.
I really like that. I think, and I think you shared some of that story with me personally a while back. Just the idea of having a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, you go and pray, and you get the sense of what God is telling you to do, or what do you have peace about doing. That's just so good, because there's a fine line of taking care of our kids and fostering dependence from them to us, but that can be overdone to where they could end up 14, 15 years old, I imagine, and go, what do you mean relationship with God? I have a relationship with my parents and they have a relationship with God, versus, no, I do this myself and God, and then they literally learn to hear God's voice. How cool is that? I love that. I think that's going to pay huge dividends for Jude in the long run. Okay.
Can I say one more thing?
Please
before you
do.
switch gears?
No, jump in. Yeah.
Just the last thing, because you reminded me of it, and Tracia, is I am really. Someone gave me a piece of advice that I'm like really been stewing over and really been praying about, and we've gotten a taste of it. That when we raise our kids, we are not raising them alone. Obviously, God's helping us. We even have friends, but there's actually strategic people that God places in your life. And someone once told me, someone I know has a teenage son who's about 19, 20 by now. And I asked him, I go, look, Jude's starting to enter that next phase of like tweening, basically, at least in his mind, his intellect. He's very sharp. What would be your advice on raising a son? And without even hesitating, he says, pray about finding a young man who's about 3, 4, or 5 years older than him to have his own relationship with your son. Spirit-filled, obviously, believer, maybe even 2 of them if you can find them. Because what's going to happen, he says, there's going to come the point where your son no longer wants to talk to you about everything, where he's going to want to have confidence in his own relationships. And you want him, yes, to have great peer relationships, but he's going to hunger for people just a little bit beyond him. And I see that already in how much he yearns for even his older cousin Kai, who's 4 years older than him. And there's this dynamic of where, at least for certain young people, they're always wanting to reach for the like half generation in front of them and be able to lean in and to learn and to ask questions and really just glean from. And it happens everywhere. People call it peer pressure, but it's really basically discipleship formation. You know what I mean? And so I've been praying, God, would you bring those people into my life? Because it really is a God-given tribe that surrounds you. You are not parenting your child alone. Yes, you are the one who's leading them, but in terms of relationship and influence, like I really am asking God, bring in those critical relationships for my son and my daughter. Yeah.
No, that's really good. That's actually great advice for me, who in the next few years, my kids will enter that transition age, from 6, 7, 8 to 9, 10, 11, 12 into teen years. And right now it's sort of like, well, they just need playmates. Right. They just need people to have fun with. But what I heard from that was, no, at some point you've got to be intentional about helping your kids foster the right kinds of relationships. They're going to have plenty of by accident relationships, but how do you lead them to get them in spaces where they're going to form bonds with true spiritual friends, which I imagine is not always easy to do.
No. We've had plenty of situations where Jude has loved being around certain boys, but because not from a place of putting them in a box and judging them as bad, but from seeing their behavior and what their struggles are as a kid, it's just not, we felt we didn't have peace about having more intimate, repeated interaction with them in this season. Because how impressionable our son is, how ill-equipped he is in that area. It's not about guarding him or anything like that to the sense of like where he can't develop, but it's kind of like a feel thing where we're praying it through and like, yeah, you know what? We're not going to invest more in that relationship because we feel it's not helping you. What it's bringing out of your character, how you talk to other kids on the playground when you're with that person, we're noticing. So it's just picking up on those things. So yeah, we've had to make some hard calls that he didn't like.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's tough, but the work of a parent, I suppose. Hey, let's shift gears for a minute. We've got a lot of questions in relation to discipline. And I know that I sat in on some of your, Pastor Robert and Natalie did a breakout session at the parenting workshop, and they talked a little bit about this, so there may be some overlap, and that's okay. But we've got a lot of questions on discipline, like how do you discipline your child in a godly way? What are effective ways to discipline teenage girls? How do you help your children avoid making the same mistakes we did? Learning how to speak to your child with patience. How do you manage your own anger? Effective discipline for strong-willed boys. The list goes on. And I'm not going to read them all, but
teenage girl, I'll definitely leave to you, Jason.
Oh my gosh, I keep imagining my girls are 7, 5, and 3. I keep imagining 10 years from now, when they're 17, 15, and 13. What will happen? But let's talk a little bit about discipline. This has been a journey for me. I have, I thought I was a pretty good, patient person.
And then you became a parent.
And then I became a parent.
Yeah.
And my girls have proven, this is me trying to put the blame. You see that? It's not their fault. My girls have exposed, let's say that, over and over again, that there's a lot of work to do in my own spiritual growth in regards to patience, gentleness, long suffering, all of those words that can be tough, regulating my own emotions, even when you're in a situation where any person right now would be legitimately frustrated, possibly angry, but the responsibility is not on my kids to fix what's going on in me. The responsibility is on me to figure this out so that I could actually be the right kind of parent in these moments. And I don't think that journey, everybody's temperament is different, but I don't think that journey looks the same for every person per se. It's been a tough one for me. I've come I think I've come a long way in like the last year, just going into things with the wrong mindset, or with a better mindset is what I should say. And there's a lot we can say about this. I've had to deal with my own impatience, my own anger issues, how we talk about that. There's a book that I had passed along to Pastor Robert not too long ago, but in the book it talks about like regulating your emotions, and it's a book about parenting, by the way, and I forget the name of it. Maybe you remember the name.
The one called Triggers?
Triggers, that's right. My wife found this book.
Yes.
And I started reading this book, and the whole point is, your kids will trigger you, right? But what you do with that, and one of the pictures that's painted in the book is like, especially with little kids, they throw tantrums for all different reasons daily, and what can happen is you could get frustrated and angry, and then all of a sudden you're stepping into them throwing a tantrum, and now you're throwing a tantrum, which is like, wow. So, and they've been on this earth for 5 years, and you've been on this earth for, 10 times that or whatever. And so now you've got to put the responsibility on yourself as a parent to go, oh yeah, how do I do this better? How do I show up better in these situations? And then there's the whole side of correction versus discipline. And I guess I'm using those words to say, like, in fact, I had a thing before I came here today to record this podcast where I corrected my kids, but I didn't follow through with an explanation of, okay, what should you do in these moments? Now, I just wanted them to, we're in a hurry. We can be in a hurry. And it's just, I just want you to do this better now. And you can approach it as what you're doing is an inconvenience to me. And I want to get rid of that inconvenience. And my wife is so much better at this. But really what needs to happen is those are all parenting moments where, this is an inconvenience to me. And I do need you to understand what you're doing wrong. But now I need to take the extra minute and a half and go, let's talk about how you can approach that differently next time so that, when your sister takes your cookie, you don't have an absolute meltdown, but you use your words, But if you don't stop to do that, they'll never learn, right? And so anyway, let me pause there. Let's talk about discipline. Let's talk about correcting our kids. Let's talk about managing ourselves from any angle.
I think managing ourselves is the biggest part of discipline. And I've found in our household, after all these years of parenting, that we have the same triggers when it comes to discipline. Somebody's hungry, somebody's sleepy, or somebody is upset about some other issue that has nothing to do with what's happening at the moment. And so a lot of times it's like, hey, let's pause. Somebody's going to take a nap, probably me. Or let's stop. Everybody go get a snack, or whoever, get a snack, get some water, and revisit it the next day, or when we've, calmed down or our belly is full. And so a lot of times I've found that we discipline out of hunger or lack of sleep. But when those things are taken care of, it's like, okay, the issue can be addressed much better when all of these extra triggers are not in the way. So it's just realizing, like, what really is the issue at hand here? Like assessing what is going on here. Why are we upset? And once that hurdle is overcome, then it's like, okay, then we can sit down rationally and talk this out and get to the issue.
And I think for me, the systemic thing comes from how you started, Garrett, and even in the semantics of the words that are used between, like, what are we talking about here? Discipline, correction. I think that's a great place to start for parents, because quite honestly, it's just something that really isn't talked through, let alone does it get down to the ground floor of our everyday life. Because for the most part, at least for me, it's okay if it isn't for the parents who are listening, discipline is basically a tool for compliance. It's, as you mentioned, how dare you make my life inconvenient? Or this is the version of life I want, and right now you're threatening that. So I need to do something in order to quickly rectify that. And so if it's merely only about consequence or even punishment, quite honestly, that's all it's about sometimes is punishment. Then we lose the very definition of discipline. If someone were to define discipline outside the context of parenting, they may get closer to actual true meaning. Discipline is being able to do something now repeatedly so that you could accomplish something that you can't do on your own right now. So they would know exactly what that means physically, whether you go see a physical therapist or whether you go see a trainer. You're doing something that you can do tangibly now so that you can accomplish and get yourself somewhere that you don't possess yet now. And so right now, our kids may not have coping skills around their own anger management, around their own ability to be individuals. And because of the age gap, maybe the younger one wants to latch onto the older one, but the older one now wants to be their own person now, and it's just really getting them angry. Well, they need a discipline to be able to come into their own individuality. What does that look like? All I'm worried about is stop yelling at your sister. Like, stop, or I'm going to come in there with a belt or whatever corrective measure people use, but we're not even picking up on what disciplines do they lack. So if we're coming into it simply with the idea of punishment or compliance, I get it. We're tired. We're doing chores. We're not exactly in the mood for like a 6-point bullet plan around like what they lack, which is why this has to be planned in the cool of the moment, not the heat of the moment. Great. Being able to, as Tracy said, customize it for your children. Where are they at seasonally? What disciplines do they need in order to root out behavioral problems? Because if it's just reacting, like, good luck. Yeah.
I think, too, a lot of the times when we think of, like, our own flawed parenting, we think of, like, anger. But one thing we've talked a lot about is, like, when God created us, like, he didn't remove anger. Mm-hmm. And I think oftentimes parents can view anger as like this horrible thing when really mismanaged anger is the problem. So it isn't about not being an angry parent. Like, if there's a dog chasing my kid, I'm going to be angry and I'm going to rip that dog to shreds. But it's the anger that brings the physiological response that empowers me to do something I really couldn't do without anger, right? Sure. So anger in itself isn't necessarily a problem. I think it's helping to manage ourselves when we feel anger shows up. It's almost like pause. If anger enters the room, I need to manage my own before I try to manage anything else. And so I realize for us, we're in a unique where there's two parents, mom and dad. So oftentimes we tag in and out. So we just know we have that look where he'll say, "Hey, I got it," or I'll say, "Go take a walk." But I realize there's people listening. You're a single parent. You're on your own with 2, 3, 4, 5 kids. And so it's going to be more challenging, but maybe for you, it's having a friend. We talked about a tribe earlier, somebody that you can text or call and say, right now, I'm really upset and my kid did something that requires my attention, but I need to regulate myself in the moment before I, can get there. Obviously, we're talking about something dangerous, right? You come into a room and a kid's jumping off a dresser with a knife, different. So in those instances, you remove the danger. But
does that happen in your home?
No.
It's a combination of different stories.
But it's like in the moment, remove the danger. But to your point, rather than just correcting to be done with it, it may require a pause. And we've done that where we'll say, hey, I need to take a pause. So everyone's just going to go in their room. And for 20 minutes, we're going to set a timer so that you have time and I have time to like come down, and then we'll come back together. There are times where we've had to do that, or you're in the car and the kids are screaming and you're like, I just need silence for like 5 minutes because it's just a lot right now. So I just say emotions are in and of themselves are not wrong, but in the context of trying to discipline and correct something that you weren't expecting, that's when emotions kind of go off the handle because they're unexpected, right? So if someone said, hey, these are all the errors that your kids are gonna make in the day, you can prepare. You create a plan like, okay, when I walk in and they've painted on the walls or they're texting stuff they're not supposed to, you can create a plan. But most of that stuff doesn't happen planned. It happens in the moment. And that's where our ability to pause so that we can respond and not react is so crucial. And whether it's having a spouse or a partner or having a friend or a family member that can kind of act as that buffer, it's really important because it's so hard in the moment to be able to like do all the regulation as you go to reach for your kid or, you know, that kind of thing. So I think for us, the one thing, and we tell people this, we went to counseling so that we could parent our kids better. And it took a few years before we ever got to parenting because we realized the two people that were the problem in the parenting of our kids was us. And we had, even from the best meaning parents, things that we needed to work through. And that is what changed our parenting probably the most.
Yeah, that's good. I think I really like the theme I heard actually from everyone was outside of the heat of the moment. If you're in a home and in a family where there's two parents, not everybody has that situation, but even if you don't, I'm assuming you can have a spiritual friend that you can do this with. There needs to be a talking out of what is the plan ahead of time for this kind of thing. It didn't take, and I think we all need to take a step back. And I think I realized if you're in a hurry with this stuff, you're going to be sorely disappointed. In other words, all of this will be inconvenient to the other facets of your life, and all of it will take work. But like the cyclical pattern in my home is we have lots of conversations about how to approach these things in the heat of the moment. Then we try to do it, and then we debrief. This is how that could have gone better. And you're right, Natalie. A lot of it in my home is what's going on between me and mom. What's going on between me and my spouse that needs to be corrected so that we're on the same team, that we're looking at this the right way. And that feedback to each other is super helpful because I found that with my wife, we have strengths and weaknesses. And so, I think the weakness is mainly on my side when it comes to parenting, at least. And so I have so many blind spots that I become aware of when we debrief. I'm like, really, that's what I said? Or really, that's how I approached that? I didn't know that that's how it was coming off or whatever. And so outside of the heat of the moment, if it's kind of like with anything that's spontaneous and contentious, if you never have a plan and you just go into it and wing it, it's going to be a disaster every time. But hopefully after about 3 or 4 disasters or more, which there will be more with kids, you're debriefing and regrouping for the next plan of attack because you in parenting, you kind of move from one little mini crisis to the next. Nothing is ever as big as it seems in the moment, but it's only a matter of time before the next thing comes up where there's a conflict, whether between your kids or between you and your kids. So I'm liking what I'm hearing. Any other thoughts on discipline before we leave that? And we didn't, this was not a full biblical framework for all the ways you could discipline your kids, but a little bit of insight there. And before we run out of time, I do want to hit at least one other subject. Okay.
Just the last thing I would say is just referring to the future resource for the Grow Workshop that we did do on parenting. Oh, yeah. Because we did tie in the book Habits of the Household. We did reference what I would consider lies that you believe in the midst of being triggered. So when something happens and you take it personal, the minute I take my kid's misbehavior personal, I'm halfway to fail. I'm halfway to blowing up. So we identified what those lies can feel like in your body, feeling like they did this intentionally because they don't respect me. That is a very triggering button for me. So being able to identify those, we talked a lot about those, and those are good to be able to identify, because most of the time it's not the misbehavior that has you getting ready to blow up. It's the message that it's telling you beneath the surface. And if you can get to that messaging quicker, get a little bit more self-awareness, you can start to defuse the bomb, if you will, and actually get to discipline and not to losing your temper. So I would point it to whenever we go to upload it, like, go ahead and listen to that. Take a look at the book.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, let's spend a couple minutes and talk about one that's always a big topic, I think, for families nowadays, and that's technology. And probably for all ages of our kids, it's a thing. But we got some questions about that. Here's one: should you go through your child's phone regardless of good or bad behavior? I'm only laughing because not because that's a funny question. That's a good question. I'm laughing because I'm trying to be lighthearted about my future and having to do that one day when my kids have phones. It's just mind blowing that we have to ask these kinds of questions. When should we do that? How should we limit device usage, phone usage? What can we say to delay our kids in having a phone? How do you disconnect kids from technology to even have a conversation with them about God? These are real life things that are a part of our world. We could take it in any direction. Thoughts on technology?
Yeah, my daughter just told me last night, you are too strict when it comes to technology. You need to loosen up. And
well,
so
she obviously knows best.
Language.
Yes, you need to loosen up. And so I was like, because so-and-so has whatever, I'm not so-and-so's parent.
Right.
I told her, I'm not so-and-so's parent. This is what we do here, and this is what we've done since day one. So I probably am a little stricter on technology than the average parent. We do have screen time. Obviously, my oldest doesn't. My 16-year-old still has some parameters around screen time.
When you say screen time, you mean on the
their
Apple
device.
devices?
Yes. So
you have that turned on.
I have it turned on. Like for her, there's certain contacts. She has a contact list that she can work with. And
So all your kids have phones?
No, she has an iPad.
Okay.
So she does not have a phone. She does not have social media yet. And I told her, you have to wait. You're probably going to have to wait till maybe 14, 16. And she's hot about that. She is not happy about that. The boys were not really into social media, so I didn't really have that issue with them.
Oh.
But she's really pushing for TikTok and Instagram. And I said, it's just not your time yet. You can't have it yet. And you can't have a phone yet. You be happy with the iPad.
Right.
So she asked if she could, since it's summertime, if she could have an hour later of screen time. And I said, let's see how this first week goes of summer. If you can act right, you can get an extra hour. So she thinks I'm so unreasonable. But I just feel like giving this device to a child is the most dangerous thing in the world with no parameters around it. Nice. Even our Apple TV or Roku or whatever we have has and our Wi-Fi has a time when it shuts off. So you're not going to get up in the middle of the night and be surfing the net because I've already put parameters around that.
I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, even the TV, there's content restrictions. So I can't safeguard everything, of course, but I'm going to do my best to not just have an open playing field when it comes to technology and the content that they're consuming. And the other day, my oldest, he thanked me. He was like, do you know, I told him early on, like, don't put your government name on the internet. Like, just be safe about that. And so he was like, do you know it's not a thing? Like, all my friends have put their government name on the internet and now they're like regretting it. And so, it's just some little things he's told me that my daughter thinks I'm crazy about, but I'd rather be safe than sorry when it comes to technology.
Yeah. And you're withstanding the fight.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. Yeah. Is there anything that, okay, so you said your youngest is hot about the fact that she can't have social media or a phone. but she's complying and she's not gone off the rails.
Right.
Is there anything around that conversation with her that's helpful, that's like, okay, you have an opinion, I have an opinion, I'm the mom? Is it just as simple as that? Or does it have to do with more of your whole relationship with her?
I think it's the whole relationship, and she realizes ultimately there's a reason why I'm doing it, because she sees some of her friends, maybe talking about things that she hasn't yet encountered, and she's like, oh, did you know one of my friends saw this or said this, and that's why you don't want me on it, huh? It's like, yeah, that's why I don't want
So she's queuing in on it.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and one of her friends told her, my mom told me I couldn't have it, but I just created like a burner account. Just go do it. And so she told me, and she was like, but I just didn't think that was the right thing to do. And I definitely don't take credit for that. I was like, that's all God that she even came to me with that. But, just the peer pressure of social media, and because she's like, I'm the only one, and I know she's not, but I'm the only one who doesn't have this or that. And I was, I just have to keep telling her this, and this is just how we're doing it. And so you have to respect where we are as a family, and realize other families do things differently, and that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
I'd say, and it's so unique too, because like Jude, he knows like he's not getting a phone in the near future. But so his whole thing is like certain video games he wants to play. And so we have a rule that he's not allowed to play any first-person shooting games. So that's just a rule that I have.
Smart.
Is that just because of, just curious, is that because of violence?
Yeah, because I feel like I've done enough research on my own, and I just feel like for a 10-year-old boy who's forming like chemical things in his brain, having him get kind of a dopamine hit from a first-person shooting game for our kid is just not healthy.
That makes a lot of sense.
So,
I probably didn't even need to ask that question.
No, that's okay.
As I visualized it, I was like, yeah, he doesn't need to be blowing people's heads off.
Right. So we've just decided for our family that's kind of the rule. And so he asked me this weekend, well, when can I get, there's a certain game that his friends all play. And I said, well, there's a maturity that comes with being able to play that kind of a game. So this is what it would look like for a mature person to be able to handle that. So I gave him a list of like 3 or 4 things, right? And so there's certain things for me where, and technology could be one of them, but you could look at dating, you could look at driving, you could look at a bunch of different sort of milestone things that kids will experience in their life that really it's around, are you mature enough to handle this, right? So you wouldn't give your 12-year-old the keys to your car, but I've actually asked a lot of parents of teenagers this question. Now looking back, your kid's a young adult. Was it harder to give them a phone or a car? And so many of them paused and said, honestly, it was the phone. Because the car, it's this huge, massive thing that you kind of know where it is, you know where it's going. But the phone, it's this tiny thing that can be a really secretive weapon when it really is a tool. Technology is a tool. It's made our lives so much easier in a lot of ways. But if your kid isn't mature enough, it can be unhealthy for them. Yeah. And so for Jude, I said, here's kind of the things that you need to do. So for example, when it comes to extra things, it's like, well, do you manage your own life? Because technology will be a distraction. So if your room is already dirty, if you're already not doing your homework, if you're already not taking care of the basic responsibilities of a 10-year-old, right? Laundry for us is one of those. Then the phone or the tablet or whatever is just going to add more distraction. So you're already going to neglect responsibilities that you already don't tend to regularly. So I said, you need to be able to tend to these responsibilities before we add a potential distraction. So for us at every stage, everything isn't a weapon, but for an immature kid, right? So you think about the tube of a wrapping paper, right? Okay, when we're done, we throw it in the trash. But to a kid, like they're banging on their sister's head. Why? Because they're immature and they're kids, So when it comes to technology for us, and we did mention it more in the parenting workshop, it doesn't have to be vilified, but we can't be naive as parents that kids are going to figure it out. You know what I mean? Or that they're going to know more about it than we are, because technology is quickly evolving. So as a parent, if I'm going to use technology as a way of for my kids to engage with the world or even with me, right? I do need to kind of stay up with what's out there, what's going on. I don't have to download TikTok, but I should at least know what it is and how it works and how can people communicate with each other. So again, for us in our home, we don't view tablet time or anything like that as this as a bad thing necessarily. What we've tried more intentionally to do is, rather than saying, how do we limit tablet time, or what are the things that are important to our family? How do we build those things in as a rhythm and a routine so that naturally their days or their times is occupied with other things?
Yeah.
So it's like there isn't room for screen time until these pockets, because everything else has kind of been allocated.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Very recently, since we were preparing for the Grow Workshop, the limits had less to do with abstinence and more to do with, as Natalie said, placing purpose within the day. So reassigning the car rides as a place for conversation. So because it's built into my son's habitual question asking, he can't really stop himself from asking, can I watch something on the way to school? But I've gotten used to that because he's still developing a new habit, to which my response is, no, son, it's actually time for conversation. And now he's getting used to it. And because of that, we're having conversations we've never had before because there's space for it now. And so I'm realizing that not only the repurposing of our day helps to push out devices, but assigning, even in the habits of the household, they said the two key words are limits and curation. It's not just the elimination. It's not the abstinence of technology that's key. It's the curation of technology that's key. What are we using it for? And probably the last thing that I would say too is like helping them understand why. Like Jude's pretty apt on asking good questions, but it's good for them to understand why. And I think every parent should realize that our society does not have our kids' best interests at heart. Like, not at the beginning. Mm-hmm. In fact, secular teaching has a term in sociology called cultural lag. And cultural lag means technology comes out first, and the implications of that technology on society does not come out until 20 to 30 years later. Yeah. They don't understand yet. Right. So there's studies coming out right now that they started 20 years ago. Mm. And now they're not even Christians. They're saying girls who are under the age of 16 should not even be anywhere near social media. Mm. Nowhere near. Clinically proven, it will introduce levels of depression, self-image problems, anxiety. Like, these are people who could care less about God. They're talking about young kids shouldn't have a cell phone below 15 at all. Like, and when you do, it should be modified. These are people who don't care about formation, but they're recognizing what is involved in integrating with an online platform that's open to the world, an open network, if you will. And it's just good to know that just because it's being peddled and we live in a society where, because of we're making a buck and we're peddling phones, it's this cultural lag thing exists, and it's nothing new. No one really knew that, when you ate poor diet back in the days, that heart disease would be the number one cause of death in America. Everyone thought it was cool to smoke cigarettes and drink. It was just a common thing, but everyone's getting lung cancer. But cultural lag, 30 years later, now they want to be the ones to tell people this is unhealthy. I have a feeling that it's going to be our kids going to be raising their kids, that it's going to be common knowledge. Oh, yeah, like online, like you need to limit that. It's going to mess with your head. But right now, you're the bad guy. Yeah. So you need to like help them interpret how to be able to engage with this.
That makes sense. I love just to highlight something Natalie kind of alluded to directly, which is I love that we could deal with this technology thing with our kids, not just on what are the right ages, but it's more about responsibility and maturity. Yeah. And that probably will look different with every kid. And so there isn't any magic number per se. I'm not saying age isn't something to consider, but you may have you could say, oh yeah, you're ready for a phone and social media at 16. Well, what if your 16-year-old is just kind of immature and irresponsible? Yeah. But you've got a 14-year-old who's like, they're probably going to do okay if I set the right parameters and limits around this. And so yeah. If for anybody listening, the Bible, you cannot open to any place in Scripture and find the recipe for technology for your kids. So if you're looking for that, right. Unfortunately, we don't have that, and it takes discernment. And I just want to highlight, it takes community. It takes the body of Christ together, talking about this as the people of God together. How should we do this with our children? And the cultural lag thing, 100% that is the case. For us, Us as millennials, we grew up with the internet just sort of happening, and for our parents, it was this just happened to our kids,
Right.
and we don't even know what to do with this. But more and more data is coming out, and I think pointing towards what you've done and are doing, which is, oh, no. This cannot be a free for all.
Yeah.
This has to be limited and curated. It's just a question of how will that look for your house? Again, this is the work of parents. If this is just a passive thing, I'm so grateful for my parents. There was a little bit of passivity for me, even in a Christian home growing up. And I think we're living in a time where there can't be any passivity at all in our families and in our homes, because there's just more opportunity for exposure to things that kids just don't need to be exposed to.
Yeah.
I
have one
Go for
last
it.
thing to add, Garrett, because you did mention like you can't find it in the Bible. There actually is one helpful scripture, and Evan, who's in the background, if you remember this, or Garrett, if you know it, pipe up. But Paul's writing to the Corinthian church, and he's using their own catchphrase against them, where they say all things are permissible for us. And it has to do with the gray areas of life. Well, you can't find it in the Bible. Well, actually, Paul gives great commentary. He says, you say all things are permissible for you, but not all things are helpful. You say all things are permissible, but I will not be mastered by anything. So it's good for us to be able to introduce to our kids that I'm trusting you to have a dialogue with me and with God, to actually be honest and ask yourself, is this helping me? Is this actually helping my formation, or is it hurting me? And then there's a second question that Paul asked, is it mastering me? If it's not helping you or it's mastering you, it is a problem.
Right.
And most of the time, if you can't tell, there's a good quick test to do. Abstinence.
Yeah.
Fasting something will right away tell you whether or not you're going through detox.
Yeah.
Like if you start to detox from something, that means it had a control on you. And it's a good way to be able to tell if something is mastering you or if it's not helping you.
Yeah, it's really good. And just to qualify, thank you for saying that. And just to qualify what I said earlier, no, it's good though, because Scripture absolutely speaks into every area of our life. Yeah. What I'm saying is, you cannot turn to the chapter and verse on the iPhone
Right.
and the internet.
Thou shalt not scroll social
But
media.
But I'm glad you brought up a principle, and there's more than that that Scripture gives us that equips us to discern well. So the wisdom that's needed to do this, you can go to the Scriptures and find all kinds of wisdom. But like a lot of things in life, ethically, morally, there are not, perfect formulas for every single situation. That's what I meant by that. But I'm glad you brought that up. And that's a great scripture to bring up in regards to that. I'm going to go for one more topic. I know we've gone a little long, but I think it's okay.
What was that, verse 7?
1 Corinthians 6:12. Oh, look at that. We're in sync.
Yeah.
This, I don't know if we can make this quick, but I think I would regret not getting to this subject. And the subject is, and we're not going to go into everything about this, but I want to at least breach it a little bit. And that is dating and sexuality. I think it's too hot of a topic. And nothing's really new under the sun in terms of this has probably been a hot topic in the history of parenting. But it's always questions in every parent's mind. When do I talk to my kid about this? What do I do if they talk to me about this? Let's take 5 or 6 minutes and just maybe address some general frameworks for how we're approaching this in our families, in the home with kids. Even any biblical perspectives that we want to offer up on this, but I think it would be healthy. So I'm going to open the forum for anybody to chime in on this.
Well, I think parents definitely have to talk earlier than we would want to about the topic of dating or sexuality, because they are going to hear it from their friends. They're going to hear it from television or
Aren't they the
internet.
teachers for them?
They're teaching something.
Probably the worst teachers.
Yeah. So it's like you have to get. I'm probably a parent who wants to wait on this, but I've tried to create an environment where my kids feel like you can come talk to me. about anything. And that has, for the most part, been the case. I try to be more of a listening ear. So even the boys have come to me with topics, and I'm like, don't you want to talk to your dad about this and not me?
That's such a testament to your parenting, though.
I think
I would have never talked to my mom about any.
I think
And bless
it's
her
like,
heart,
listen,
she
yeah.
only had what she only knew what she knew, right? Our parents only give us what they have. But like, I never would have done that as a teenager.
I think I've developed the art of the poker face, because inside I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So I try to have a poker face and listen, but they know that if they want feedback or to talk through something, they're like, I'm going to talk to daddy about this because he's a talker. But they'll come talk to me because I'm the listener. And so I've just tried to be a listening ear and not freak out about things. And usually the me listening and them talking helps them to, sort of think it out for themselves. And so that's been my philosophy, is just be a listening ear, don't freak out. And then where I feel I need to input, I do.
That's really...
So like, oh, you like this girl and she's not a Christian. Okay. She's pretty, but don't you think you need more than that? So I try not to lecture or, make them feel like I'm judging them, but just have you thought about everything that you need to think about?
That seems so wise, and I commend you for having that kind of discipline, because you're having the your jaw, not letting your jaw hit the floor,
or mock them.
But
you want to date her?
right.
In your dreams.
Well, I think it's more like you want to date her, and then it's fear, like, oh gosh, is she gonna break your heart? Or it's like that thing.
Yeah.
Like you know that they're going to go out into the world, and you've probably broken some little boy's heart before and you didn't want to, but it happens. And so you just don't want your child's heart to be broken.
My heart was broken many times. No, that's wow.
I think for us, it's a little different because our kids are younger. I know you have, 16 and 20. So we're still in a season where we're building a foundation. And as a general rule for our kids in our home is we don't lie about anything, and we answer age-appropriate questions. So wherever we can, we try and have, because they'll come, my friend at school likes this girl. Well, what do you mean he likes her? We'll just ask more questions. Well, what does he like about her? What does that mean between them that he likes her? How does it change how they are around each other? So we try and get our kids to kind of break down more of what do you mean? Because then sometimes it allows us to speak into it without it being directly about them, but just giving them like a foundation of here's how men and women interact with each other. Here's what's appropriate. Here's what's not inappropriate. Well, what does he say about her? Why do you think he likes her? What has he said to you that makes you think he likes her? All right. And so we try and kind of get at those more formative, like root type things, because they're not yet coming home with I like someone. And so for us, it's helping, like, especially for our son, he'll mention, one day when I get married, I said, yeah, well, being married is a big responsibility. So here's why. And so we kind of go that way, which usually just eventually he's like, okay, Mom, I was not trying to I wasn't bringing my wife home yet, that kind of thing. But in every small way, we try and just make these small deposits to build a foundation for them to understand, like, this is your body. This is why your body's not your own. This is all the decisions in your life that you make. This is the people that you spend your time with and you give affection to. Like, we try and, because of the season that we're in, just more do the formative work right now of finding the small pockets where we can ask the questions and make the deposits, so that in the future we can draw back on, hey, the scaffolding that we've built, and now we're like putting it more together, if that makes sense. So I think for parents, again, we don't have teenagers, but we did do work with young adults for 10 years. Yeah. And we realized a lot of them, even on the topic of dating, don't really understand the purpose of it.
No.
So they're having all these root problems, and you're like, oh, the reason why you keep having these failed relationships is because you don't yet fully understand who you are. So identity is a big part of sexuality and even dating, because it's like, if you're not secure in who you are, especially as a Christian, in your identity with God, so many things that relate to other people are just going to get derailed quite easily, because you're kind of on this rocky foundation yourself, and now you're inviting someone else into that.
Yeah, it was very telling being able to walk alongside young adults, especially ones that are enamored in the dating process. And oftentimes I like to throw a wrench in there in the middle of the conversations. Everyone's all giddy and talking about who they're, attracted to. And I'd ask a question. I'd be like, hey, can I ask you a question? They're like, yeah. I'm like, are you ready to serve someone for the rest of your life? And we could just hear the record scratch. Like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And it was just my way, because I had a trusted relationship with him. And I think at some point it'll be the way of talking to Jude, that dating is not disconnected from marriage, that it's always with that in mind. Now, I will say this, because everyone has different methods for raising their kids, that it doesn't need to be so serious. It can be casual, but at the same time, it's not careless. Because I tried to emphasize to a lot of young adults, I go, do you really know the power of winning a woman's heart? Like, do you really understand what happens when a woman gives you her heart? Mm-hmm. Like, that is a massive honor and responsibility. And you don't understand that when you spend one-on-one time with someone, you can't predict when that happens. Mm. So you may not be that into her, but because you have gone on a dating rhythm with her, you need to be prepared that she may give it up sooner in terms of her heart than you want to. And you are responsible for that to some degree in terms of how you steward that as a man. So just being able to let Jude know that dating isn't just like go have fun and have an ego trip, or if it even gets to the physiological part, want to be able to please your body. It's being able to treat women with respect. That's why we encourage like group outings. If you want, people sometimes encourage their kids to go on dates so that they can develop how to be able to interact with the opposite sex, to which I kind of disagree with that. Yes, it will kind of help develop that, but develop that in group settings, because the minute you go on one-on-one, you are making a space for intimate connection. And you need to be soberly aware that if someone actually likes you, it's going to build. And oftentimes in our dealings with young adults, is they don't ever take ownership for what's developing on the inside of someone else. Well, that's them. I'm not that into them, but they can feel that what's building in them is actually something more intimate, and they don't want to take ownership for it. They just want to break someone's heart, or I didn't mean to. And it's just like, no, if I'm going to raise my son, I'm going to let him know, hey, when you go to date, like actually there is the ability for a girl to give you her heart, and you need to be alert to that, because this is all connected to long-term relationship. And I don't want to raise kids that just treat it as cavalier.
That's great. I think a big, principle that I picked up from all of you is if we're going, first of all, if we're going to foster an environment where our kids can talk to us, then we can't treat, especially something like dating and sexuality, as this is just taboo and off limits. Right. And every time we're just not going to talk about it, it's just going to be silence. And then taking a step back even from that, generally speaking, if it's dating and sexuality, if it's going to church, if it's reading our Bibles, if it's intimacy with God, whatever we're trying to do in our homes with our kids, we have to understand that it's not just cutting them off from the harmful things, because in reality, the way they're going to grow is if we actually go on a journey with them into the things that we're afraid of. Right. I don't want you to even talk about liking a girl. I don't even want you to have a crush or go on a date. But we have to realize they're going to go on a date eventually, even if you force them to wait till they're 25. and even then, right. What's worse, they're 25 and they have no clue about anything, like you were just describing. Right. Like what do you, if it's a young man, like, do you understand the power over a woman's heart you can have, or vice versa?
Right.
Do you understand the power
right.
you can have over a man, right? Those kinds of conversations can't happen unless we give some kind of bandwidth for our kids to interact with the world in this way, which might mean you let them engage a little bit. I think we have to fall back on what are the biblical principles that help us discern who is the individual kid, what is their maturity level, what is their responsibility level. But I think I'm realizing, even as a young parent, I'm going, I'm not just going to have to I can't just protect my kids from all risk and problems, and that will be the way that I disciple them. No, I have to if there's going to be any dialogue, they have to engage with these situations. Otherwise, because what I heard from you guys is you let your kids talk to you about these things, and then you just drop little seeds. So it doesn't feel to them, I think, it won't always feel to them like, oh, mom and dad set me straight. But you kind of did set them straight, but you let them come to their conclusions, and that's a different way of parenting.
And whatever Jude usually reveals, I try and preview the next season. So even if he may be dealing here, I use that to be like, where will he be in 2 years with this subject? So I'll give you a very quick example.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about crushes on the playground, and it just very naturally, based on the cards he was laying down, I asked him, hey, how do your friends talk about girls' bodies? And it was cool. It was a great conversation just around that. But he wasn't exactly talking about that, but it was an adjacent.
Sure,
and it was the next season because he hasn't even started talking about that.
Okay.
He's still a little bit, not in the naive. It's just not there yet.
Sure.
But preview the next season always with your kids, because
great.
chances are their friends are previewing 2 seasons ahead.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So
yeah.
anyways.
No, that's good. Hey, listen, we're out of time. And for those of you that are listening, I'm sorry if we didn't get to your specific question, but what we hope is that we've at least engaged in a decent conversation around some key areas of parenting. That was the goal. And I just want to put it out there that over the next couple months, we've got some plans as the Grow team to unleash a few more digital resources for parenting. So be on the lookout for those. Those will come in different forms, but we're gonna curate some things around the more specific subjects like technology, like dating and sexuality, those kinds of things. We're gonna go research and hunt some things down or create some things ourselves that we believe will be helpful. And with that, we thank you for engaging. And coming up in September will be our next big workshop for everyone at the church. Be on the lookout for that. That's going to be around the topic of our vocation, our work, our purpose, our callings as Christ followers. So we're excited about that. That'll be the next subject. But with that, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.